The Queensland Air Museum is on 2 hectares on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. We have just over 80 aircraft here on display, all historic aircraft. Helicopters, fixed wing, jets, propellers, whatever, and engines and all kinds of artefacts. We have a library here, we have workshops here, all sorts of things go on here. Many of our volunteers are experts, whether it be as engineers or as pilots or navigators, whether they're ground crew or air crew, they have stories to tell that come from the real world. We think it's important that this museum gives people the opportunity to learn something, and the best way to do that, we reckon, is for them to be able to get up close to the aircraft and hear the personal stories that go with them.
The organisation started off as the Queensland branch of the Aviation Historical Society of Australia. We used to have monthly meetings, we'd show movies, we'd have the occasional guest speaker. Some of us would contribute written articles to the Society's journal. We'd always been interested in aviation history, and we were always vocal in criticising people for not preserving aircraft. Nobody was saving aeroplanes and they're all being scrapped. And we thought, well, hang on, it's going to be up to us to do something about this. And around that time, an ad appeared in the Courier Mail advertising a number of Canberra bombers for sale. That was 1973.
You look at the beginnings of this museum, you've got a small group of people who believed in the idea of having this kind of preservation of history and this kind of collection available to the public. So they chipped together their finances and they purchased number 225, the Canberra bomber that's on our logo. That then began a 10-year process of trying to find a place to put it. This was hard, let's face it. They'd moved several times, they had to take it apart every time and put it back together, but they stuck with it. And it was that spirit, I think, of we're going to do everything we can to make it happen, that led to the formation of the Queensland Air Museum to where we are today. As time went by, it became pretty obvious that if we grew the collection, we were going to need to grow the capacity to store and look after that collection. So in 1986 and 7, the museum was able to move to this area at the Caloundra Aerodrome, thanks to the Landsborough Council, who offered 1 acre of land and a hangar.
We're telling a story here, and this museum has probably got as good a history of aviation, and particularly aviation in Australia, as you'll find anywhere. And I think as a primary medium, it's educating people about the contribution that aviation has made, not only to the country, but to the world.
I think one of the strengths of the collection now is how diverse it is. We have over 50,000 items in our library. It's a very significant aviation collection, right from engines down to personal items like photographs, medals, uniforms. We try to collect as much of that as possible.
We want to know what happened to the aeroplane that we have here today, what it's done, who's owned it, what it was used for.
I think you'd have to say one of the most significant aircraft we have is behind me, the DC-3. That aircraft has a fascinating and very rich history. It's had several liveries over the years, it's had several roles over the years. General Douglas MacArthur during the Second World War flew in this aircraft. This aircraft flew twice under the Sydney Harbour Bridge as part of a stunt at one point. This aircraft ferried refugees away from impending invasion from the Japanese during the war. It began its life in Holland with Royal Dutch Airlines. So there's lots of aspects to its history.
Everyone loves the F-111, everyone loves the Orion and the DC-3 and the Mirage. Everyone's got their favourite plane for various reasons.
Our F-111 here flew in the Royal Australian Air Force from 1973 to 2010 when they were retired. Most people enjoy being told a story or two about flying the F-111 and things we did. That adds to their experience. Now at the museum, our Boeing 737-800 simulator. So if people really want to experience what it's like to fly, this is one way where you can come and get that type of experience.
Our sim guides provide this experience to visitors have all been pilots of some description in the past, including myself. I think if the museum can help to inspire, educate and inform young people in their pathway as they go forward, that's a great thing we can do as well, I think.
Those who are working specifically on the aircraft, they will assess what needs to be done. It might be as simple as, stripping it back and getting it ready for a recoat of paint. Or it might be more difficult than that. They might actually be building an aircraft from a component, from a fuselage. And they might have sourced components that have to be added to it. And so they are involved in both acquiring and then preparing and fitting those components. And that might involve instrumentation in a cockpit. It might involve, the fittings within an aircraft, or it might involve an engine. There are all kinds of specific components. And because many of our volunteers are skilled with tools and are very motivated, but may not necessarily be trained in avionics or in aviation, sometimes they need to seek skilled support to do that. But then when it comes to the actual hands-on work, it's amazing what can be done by volunteers.
Without museums like this, we lose an awful lot of knowledge and experience and capability. And I think for a lot of people, it's a second hobby, if you like. They suddenly find they can actually dedicate their skills and time. It's very satisfying. Or I've had the opportunity of learning an awful lot, particularly about the Royal Australian Air Force.
A few years ago, I first came to the Sunshine Coast. I begged my parents if I could come in here and take a look. I was amazed by the volunteers, the tour guides, the aircraft. The history here is just astounding. And I became a volunteer here after I joined the Australian Air Force Cadets just next door. And you learn quite a lot about not only the aircraft, the history as well.
When we call ourselves a people's museum, I guess that covers it. We mean people, any people. Anyone who's interested to come in here, they'll be welcomed.
Well, there isn't really an average day. It's so unpredictable, from aged care homes and seniors groups, and students come through, high school students, aviation students, and they're always knocked out at how massive the Air Museum really is.
I feel as though what we're doing here is important. We exist to preserve aviation heritage with a particular emphasis on Australia. That's the bottom line, that's what we exist for. But the main point is to not let this history be lost. Because once history is lost, it's lost forever. It's a very special time for us. It's literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to celebrate a 50th anniversary. And to be part of an organisation that's doing that it's a very significant thing. And we want to make the most of the opportunity to think about what it took to get here and what it's going to take for another generation in 50 years' time to look back when this place is celebrating its centenary. If we just keep doing everything in the future the way we're doing it now, there's no guarantee that that will be enough. And we have some genuine challenges here. For example, we rely upon our volunteers, and we have to be proactive about recruiting and looking after our volunteers and training them and bringing them into the fold in a future generation which may see volunteering differently. So we have to be willing, I think, to take the opportunity now in our 50th year to be bold and to be courageous about the future, because we only got here by being bold and courageous, or that is to say those who've gone before us have. And we owe it to them to be the same and to look to the future and be willing to do whatever it takes to make sure this museum has a future.